Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 285, Mental Fitness. Oh yeah. Now, every year we try to do something special, nay spectacular, for the week that is the Are You OK Day, nay week. We try and add and celebrate the importance of this day and this week and this moment in thinking about wellness and mental health, particularly in the doctoral space, but also more widely. And as you might see via this screen, I'm so excited. I have a guest on the vlog, and can I say that is so rare that I've had a chance to use that phrase during COVID. So I have a guest, and this person is very special to me, one of the truly brilliant, interesting and compassionate people that I've met in my academic journey, and the partnership that he has with the Office of Graduate Research is stunning. So I'm so glad I have an opportunity to introduce him to you. So it's my pleasure to introduce the legendary Dr. Gareth Furber. Now, Gareth is at Flinders University. He's the e-mental health project officer in health counselling and disability services at Flinders University. He received his PhD in 2007 and has had a career in adolescence and child mental health, profoundly important areas, outstanding research in that field if you'd like to seek it out. But he also has other areas of expertise that interest me as well. Service benchmarking has always been an area that interests me. And also, this is good, understanding the mental health workforce. These are big topics and big ideas. And I had the privilege of, when I was preparing for this vlog, reading this remarkable research, and I certainly recommend it to you. So we have the great joy of working with Gareth. So it's my pleasure to introduce him to the vlog. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Tara. Thanks so much for having me. So you were very kind in the introduction, but that kind of legendary status applies backwards well in terms of your work in this space. So I'm super happy to have been invited to talk on the blog today. So thank you.
Oh, you're an absolute legend. You are a wizard amongst us, mate. And look, I've got lots of questions to ask you, because obviously my job is caring for our students and our colleagues, our supervisors, and I am worried with what's happened in the last 5-10 years in this space, and I want to use your expertise. I want to understand what's happening. So if I can ask you a few questions that uses your expertise, I'd be appreciative.
Absolutely.
And the first area, I'm interested in digitisation, and I've done some work on e-health, but one of the huge areas of your current responsibilities, and we're seeing it in your research too, is exploring those digital channels for health. Now, what is the value, do you think, of digitisation to health, but also, and I'll use the word well-being, for a student population?
The biggest ticket one for me is that I work on Bedford Park campus. I love Bedford Park campus. I work within the health service there and the counselling service there. And there's a problem when you work on a campus that you become attached to really just the welfare of that specific campus itself. But the message that I'm trying to get across around mental health, around mental fitness, around self-care applies to the entire Flinders community. And we're spread out across multiple areas, multiple campuses, interstate, even overseas. And with stuff like COVID, we have offshore students now and things like that. So from my perspective, if I'm only doing kind of face-to-face stuff, live stuff that people can attend only if they're nearby to me, then I'm doing a disservice to the community as a whole. The other thing is that everyone's timetable is different. So I might run a session in the morning. I miss out on 50% of the student population because they've got a lecture there. And to be honest, I'd rather that they're at their lecture, or at least have prioritized their lecture. So people can access digital resources when they need. So if they want to do my course at 2 o'clock in the morning, perfect, perfect time to do it, perfect opportunity to do it. So that's really the biggest ticket item for me. Then the kind of next set is that there are some things that the digital channel offers you that you don't necessarily get in the face-to-face. So when I'm delivering a course with students online, I can pull up just about any resource I need at that point in time. Oh, by the way, here's a really good video. and just pull it up and share it in the screen. Oh, here's a handout that you really need, and just share that on the screen. Here's a paper, here's a whatever, and I've got them to hand. So there's an efficiency that can go with the digitization of health services that you can't achieve as easily in the face-to-face setting. It's complementary, and look, I'm very mindful of the fact that we still, even though we might consider students on average in the younger generation to be more digitally kind of capable, we still find that there's strong preferences for face-to-face and interpersonal and catching up with people one-on-one. So I don't see digitization as a replacement. I see it as, for some, a better option, for many, a complementary option.
Just phenomenal, and so important to our higher degree students, as you know, because we've talked about it so often. 1/3 of our students exist outside of South Australia. 1/3 of our students are part-time. So for our part-timers, and our age of our students now spans from 21 years of age to 93 years of age. So that the great thing about digitization and how you use it, I think, is it works and weaves so beautifully with the diversity of our students, I think.
Yeah. And look, we've got, Flinders did an amazing job with COVID, like all the teaching staff, in terms of getting their content and their lectures from the sort of the face-to-face predominant version to online. So as a university as a whole, we've done amazing in shifting into that space. I'm lucky that I get to focus primarily on that space. So doing a face-to-face thing is like a little treat for me. Like if I get to, you know, come out into the real world and do that work. But it does require a certain, I think I have a certain personality that's well suited to it. So I can work in isolation. I'm really happy communicating through these kind of channels. I really enjoy it. I don't get Zoom fatigue. I don't get any of those sorts of things. But I don't think that's always the norm. I think you need to look for people who are really happy to work into that digital space.
Yeah, I mean, Gareth, there's no doubt in my mind you are a wizard. So I've always known that. I pegged you early. So wizards don't get Zoom fatigue, mate. So clearly that's the case with you. But could I ask another question? Again, you can see I'm passionately interested in this, and it's an area that I want to learn from you. And let's talk about the word well-being, if we can. I offer some very, very sad commentary about well-being. It's a little bit hippie for me, but I'm an old goth. Right? I'm an old golf, well-being, you know, you use well-being a lot in your professional work, but also in your research. How are you engaging with the word well-being? How does it move meaningfully into personal and professional debates, do you think?
So I can come at it from a sort of technical angle in terms of where we sit well-being in relation to mental health and other things. That gets a little bit kind of clunky, and then there'll always be someone who disagrees with it. What I tend to try and do is I think of well-being as essentially primarily the subjective sense that an individual has about how they're doing across the different domains of their life. And everyone has multiple domains in their life. So they have their friendships and their social life. They have maybe their intimate relationship, their family life. They have their professional and work life. They have their financial life. They have the environments in which they sit, their houses, homes, gardens, communities, etc. They have, for some people, a spiritual component to their life. And you can ask most people to make it a subjective assessment of how well am I doing in those areas and how important is that area to me. So someone might say, financial independence is really important to me, but I don't think I'm doing very well. And therefore, you've got a really good starting point for that person, which is, okay, let's skill you up in managing your finances. And what you want to do is get those areas that are most important to someone operating at a level that they're happy with. Now, that's a little bit different from objective measures of whether someone's doing well. So a psychologist might... and we love measurement. We develop measures for all sorts of different constructs. We might measure someone and say, well, look, objectively, or at least as compared to the general population, you are more depressed or less depressed, more anxious or less anxious, doing better in this area or not doing better in that area. Objective can be useful, But when I'm working with students or when I'm teaching, I'm really interested in the subjective assessment that the person makes about that area of life, because the subjective assessment forces them to actually do that reflection, to actually sit there and do an honest appraisal of, how is my social life? Like, if I sit and think, how is my social life? I go, it's not that great, actually. Like, I do need to, I've become so digital that that I need to actually invest in those, in those relationships in another way. So yeah, I get it's multidimensional. So someone's well-being can be considered across multiple dimensions. And then within each of those dimensions, a person can make a rating of how important that dimension is. So some people prize spirituality much higher than, say, intellectual domains. Some people prize intellectual domains much higher than family or whatever it is. And then that second question of, how do you think you're doing in it? Do you have room for improvement? Is there capacity? Would you like help with or assistance with making progress in that particular domain?
That's changed my life. So that's changed my life, because and I apologize in advance, I've made a lot of cheap jokes through my career about wellness and well-being and resilience. And I'd like to apologize on behalf of my entire family, Gareth, for making those jokes.
Don't. I sit in the wellbeing industry and I make all sorts of like similar jokes along the way.
Yeah, when is too much aromatherapy oil? Too much aromatherapy oil. Getting the rose quartz, getting the chakra in line. You've just provided the best definition I've ever thought about. That's going to change my life. So understanding the movement of domains and the subjectivity of what domains matter and how are you traveling in them. That helps me a lot. Now, that links to my next question, which I am obsessed by this phrase, and I have no content in this phrase, which is why I've called the entire vlog this. Let's go to mental fitness. Now help me with this, because I think this is tremendous. I think this has huge capacity. Explain it to me, mate.
Okay, so it's easy to start with physical fitness first. So the concept of physical fitness. So if we think about one's physical fitness, it's really about one's capacity to cope with the physical demands of life. So there are physical demands of life. You've got to move, you've got to carry stuff, you've got to bend, lift, you need to motor around, you need to
personal hygiene.
Yeah, correct. You've got to move this meat suit of yours around space and time. Okay. And there are various demands along the way. If you're an academic, the physical demands on you aren't necessarily huge. It's like get in the car, drive, sit for
personal hygiene.
Personal hygiene still applies. That will apply across all of us. But if you're an athlete, for example, the physical demands on you are significantly higher. So your fitness is really, you're physically fit in the sense that you can cope with the physical demands of life. You can do the things that you want to do. And then there are more objective measures of physical fitness that relate to one's risk for disease, for example, or health or well-being. But essentially, I think of it as am I physically capable of coping with the physical demands of life? So mental fitness is your capacity to cope with the psychological demands of life. Ooh. So now, when we're talking academics now, so I threw some shade on them around the physical demands, but if we talk about the psychological demands that an academic faces, those are considerably, in many cases, over the top. So from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep, they have to plan, they have to organize, they have to write, focus, concentrate. They have to deal with people, multiple people, manage multiple relationships. They have to filter information so that they're getting and taking out what they need and what they don't. They have to learn to resist certain impulses, like we have to dampen down certain things. So, that person says something, I might want to punch them in the face, but no, that's not the right option. I'm going to correct. So we're doing a huge amount of psychological work on an everyday basis. And I would say modern society broadly is far more psychologically demanding than it is physically demanding. So then mental fitness is, are you keeping up with, or do you have the capacity to manage the psychological demands of your life? And you're not managing the psychological demands of life if some of those mental ill health, high levels of distress, not keeping up with your work, procrastination, these things that are indicating that your kind of current level of mental fitness is not sufficient to manage the level of demand that's on you psychologically. And so you would work on your mental fitness if you need to up your capacity to manage those psychological demands. Now, it is also worth noting that it's a responsibility of a workplace and society in general to also finally make some calls about when too much is too much, right? So we don't want it always to be a person thinking, well, I'm not keeping up with life, therefore it must be a fault of my own. Sometimes the demands that we put on people, in fact, often the demands we put on people are far in excess of what's actually reasonable.
Absolutely.
But at an individual level, and that's where I tend to focus when I'm talking with people, is that do you feel as though you're able to manage the psychological demands? Can you do all those things? Can you plan? Can you focus? Can you concentrate? Can you get your work done? Can you maintain most of the interpersonal relationships that you have? Are you able to switch off at the end of the day? Are you able to switch back on in the beginning of the next day? And again, that subjective assessment of how well I think I'm managing the mental and psychological demands of life as a whole. And so if you want to build physical fitness, you train, right? So the type of training you do is based on what is it you're trying to build. So if you're an athlete and you need strength, well, you're going to go to resistance training. If you need cardiovascular endurance, you might go to swimming or running. If you need flexibility, you'd go to Pilates or yoga. And we don't have it quite as well defined, I think, in the psychological space. But if you want to train your mind, there are different ways that you can go about that, depending on what it is you want to build. So all of us, you and I, exist in one of the best mental fitness gyms of all, which is a university. University is a place of education. We develop a whole bunch of skills and maintain them by staying in a university.
Yeah.
But other people train their minds through meditation, through religious and spiritual practices,
Yes,
through networking and building of big social networks, because when we build social networks, we build not only social skills, but we build a whole lot of capacity to cope with stressful times because we know the right person to call to. Some people build it through adventure, right? So they put themselves in new situations on a regular basis to notice what things they're good at, what things they're not so good at, where their touch points are, their sore points. Some people do the whole mind-body stuff. So the separation of mind and body is useful from a descriptive point of view. It's not really accurate from a kind of biological point of view to separate them out. But some people engage in types of physical activities that we know improve cognitive function. And most types of physical activity improve cognitive function and improve mood of some sort. But a lot of people sit at that kind of the yoga, the use of breathing strategies and breathing retraining, and use those as means of not only calming the body, but also calming and strengthening the mind. And so there's these different types of mental fitness training that we can do, and we can pick them depending on what we think we need to develop.
That is transformative for me. And can I say, I love everything you just said there. I've learned a lot. What I think is amazing is, again, I've always taken a bit of the mickey out of the word resilience, but I always love David Chandler's reconfiguration of that word, looking at organisational resilience. That I think is incredibly important. And just what you've said there is, we can talk about an individual not being well, or we can talk about mental fitness and say it is an organisational responsibility to enact that. That changes my life, mate.
Yes. And look, one of the things you can do at an individual level to enhance your psychological experience is modify your environment. So I work well here, right? Because I've invested a lot of time and effort in making this space that's around me not only practical, like a decent camera and a microphone and monitors and stuff like that, but soothing as well. Like there's plants in here, there's art in here, there's little knickknacks, there are things that are my personality. Compared to my work office, which is like a little cupboard, a little dark cupboard, essentially, a little bit Harry Potterish. You know, the difference between me working in this space and me working there is quite different in terms of mood and focus and concentration and ability to be able to. So yeah, a workplace has a responsibility to create an environment where at least individuals can meaningfully move towards better productivity, better mood, a greater sense of meaning and purpose and stuff like that. So it's both groups have responsibility. A workplace has to provide an environment in which it's just feasible that someone could make that personal progression. But then I think individuals, we also really have responsibility just to ourselves more than anything. I don't owe anyone else out in the community a particular way of feeling, but I probably owe myself the opportunity to try and operate at my best.
Look, I agree with that. I agree. I think that's remarkable. What I'd like to do now is we're going to get to the crunchy bit. And again, you're helping me enormously here. I need to know about this, and you are helping me and thousands of people that will watch this. But the next question is about higher degree students.
Yes.
Now, the mental health issues, and I have a whole series of challenges with the phrase mental health, but let's use that, noting it's shorthand for many other variables. The mental health of higher degree students has been a major area of discussion, particularly in the last 5 years, particularly after I think that Belgian longitudinal study was the first wake-up call, I think, for a lot of us. Now, what is it, Gareth, about the doctoral space, and obviously you completed your PhD, as have I, what is it about this doctoral space that is particularly concerning for allowing people to develop mental fitness and therefore manage the vagaries of academic life in a doctoral program?
That's such a good question. I don't feel any answer is going to give the full picture or honour that question as well as I can. But I'll talk about the things that come to mind. So one is that a PhD is in itself almost a complete form of mental fitness training. It's the sort of physical equivalent of spending 7 or 8 hours in the gym, you know,
Huge.
and which means it's completely dominant in terms of what it is you're doing. And so the room for other things in your life during that stage can sometimes be quite difficult. And then people get conflicting messages. So they're sort of, at some level, they're told to really invest their time and effort into the PhD, but then sometimes they're told you need to get balance. And it's not the same picture for everyone. Some people actually do better by just going completely into the PhD, get it done, you know, just motor through it. And then when they come out, they can look and go, okay, let's get these things back into my life that I've lost over that period of time.
Yes.
Other people need a much more balanced approach to it. They need to have their PhD as being part of a more complex life that's going on around them, because they already have family and responsibilities and other bits and pieces. But I don't think there's that degree of flexibility in the system, as far as, you know, oh, well, we can give you this PhD experience, but you can have this PhD experience. And because the problem is that the area that the people are then going into, the experience that can be provided in the PhD is at least partly a reflection of the field in which they're going into.
Huge.
So, because it's intended to be, in most cases, preparing you to work in the field that you're going into.
Yes.
So it has to, at some place, in some ways, look similar to what it is you're going into. And if you're going into academia, you're going into a difficult space. Like, you're going into a space where you're going to have to work really hard. It's highly competitive. There'll be lots of times where you do excellent work, but you don't get rewarded for it because you don't get a grant, or you don't get, and it's not because of it's not because your idea was crap or that you don't have the ability. It's because statistics are not on your side here in terms of the number of people that can get funded. And so you're doing this incredibly detailed and mentally taxing piece of work. And then you're also looking forward and going, am I going to survive in the space in which that I'm working? Because we tend to have really limited ideas of what we're going to do whilst we're doing our PhD. Like, I didn't have this job in mind that I do now. There's no way I conceptualize that. I thought, I'm either a clinician or I'm going to be a researcher. So I spent a bit of time being a clinician, didn't really like that. Spent a bit of time being a researcher, it was like, on that. And thought, okay, well, that's the end of the story for me. And then I end up in this space. A lot of PhDs don't realize they'll end up in a completely different space than they might realize. And they'll be actually really happy they did the PhD, even though it didn't lead to the outcome they thought it would at the time. So it's just a really confusing, uncertain, difficult period of time in our life. And our brains do everything they can to try and take uncertainty out of the picture. Our brains don't like uncertainty. We don't like having our amygdala on 24 hours a day trying to work out how things are going to operate and how it's all going to work. So, and it's not just the PhD itself, it's the whole context around the PhD that's confusing and uncertain. So now you throw COVID in on top of that, which is just a whole level of additional uncertainty at a global level. And yeah, I really don't envy anyone who's trying to navigate, let's say, those 3 levels of uncertainty. There's the uncertainty of what it is you're studying. There's the uncertainty of the context in which you're doing your PhD, what it's going to mean career-wise, where you're headed after that. And now you've got this 3rd level of global uncertainty around, like, will there even be the sort of a traditional university, or will there, what's going to happen here? What's happening with my family and friends? What's happening? Wow. You know, that's a lot to manage. And for a lot of, and I realize there's a broad age range for PhDs, but for a large chunk, they're doing it at a stage in life where there's, you know, a lot of the neural development has been done, but we're still really, our brains are still trying to lock a fair bit into place, even well into our 20s. All right, so there's still a lot of reorganization happening up here during that age period. So maybe that's the 4th level of uncertainty that the person's having to deal with, is that kind of developmental uncertainty, which is, even if they weren't at uni, they'd still be like, oh, what am I doing with my life? And should I do this? And what about that? And
well, can I say, Gareth, I'm 52, and what you've described there is exactly me. Like, what am I doing? Who am I? Why does it matter? I'm becoming a different person. I think through COVID, I've become a different person. So I think we've all got that plasticity occurring in our brain at the moment, because our context is changing radically and quickly. And if I add a bit of Aurelio to this conversation, I think the speed of the change is also an element in the discussion as well. So let's try and get to something buoyant and positive here about what sort of support, and I'll use the word structures, it might be the wrong noun, Gareth, what sort of support structures or strategies can manage or configure or frame or shape a better environment for our higher degree students?
So I think your supervisor has got to count for a really large part of that. And I haven't done a huge amount of reading in the space, but the bits I've done have suggested that, you know, a reasonable chunk lies in the supervisor, the quality of the supervisor relationship.
Yes.
So that then involves thinking about the welfare of supervisors, right? So we tend to think about, okay, a student has had a bad experience with a particular supervisor. What's going on there? And we tend to focus on the experience of the student. But we kind of have to ask ourselves, what was the experience of the supervisor? You know, what is it that they're dealing with that maybe didn't allow them to provide the level of support that they wished they'd been able to provide, or they wanted to be able to provide? I haven't met that many, like, genuinely unkind people in the supervisory space. Do you know what I mean? Like, they might be overworked, they might be stressed out, they might make some poor choices because of that, but it's not because they intend to do anything bad. There's a few bad eggs, but there's some of those everywhere. So I think in Flinders is sort of heading down this path where our wellbeing plan is starting to look at staff and students at the same time.
Yes.
And not just focusing on one or the other.
Yes.
So that would be the first one, which is a little counterintuitive to what because I work in a student-facing service, but I really think we have to think about the health of supervisors, so that they have in their workloads the capacity and the time to really invest in trying to build a new mind in that area. And that's really, it's a huge responsibility to try and build and nurture a mind that can take over the reins of your field or a similar field from you. Then there's just removing as much ambiguity as you can out of the formalities of a PhD. So just making it really clear that these are the key dates. These are your key contact people. These are the programs that we have in place. This is when you would use them. Making sure you're providing that information on an ongoing basis, because we tend to tell students a whole lot of stuff at the beginning of their experience and hope that their memory will hold on to, like, 4 hours of orientation information. Most of it disappears within about 15 minutes. So, it's that ongoing communication about, hey, these are the supports, this is why you would use them, here's how to put them in place. And they have to be specific and unambiguous. Like if you're having some motivation issues, you speak to a counselor. If you're having writing issues, you speak to someone from, student learning support services. Yeah, exactly. Your supervisor. Really precise. That's the thing I've got wrong a lot in my job, is that I'm not more precise about what it is I'm suggesting to students. I talk at an abstract level, like, oh, well-being and blah, 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 and this and that. And I know in my head what the precise connections are, but I don't articulate that clearly enough. We need to do that.
Very important. And so it's funny, a lot of the literature in teaching and learning, as you know, says that overtness. A lot of the conversations I've had with colleagues through these vlogs is speak the unspoken assumptions.
Yes.
Speak it. So don't assume you agree with your supervisor, you agree with other people. Speak the words, communicate, and see if you do agree. And I suppose, go, mate, please.
Yeah, no, that's a really nice way of putting it. Because when we teach, we know that we need the person to self-reflect, right? And that in the process of them taking this new material and trying to build it into their current worldview, that they will get better at whatever it is that we're doing. But we often, I think we often make people do that a little too early, right? Where if someone doesn't really know about an area, they can't self-reflect on it. You have to give worked examples. You have to be specific. You have to actually go, here's an example of this thing being worked through. Here's an example of what I ask from students, during the first year in terms of their, getting the introduction prepared or their research. We have to be quite precise in what it is that we're asking for. And then as they understand that part, then they're more equipped to start doing the more reflective, higher level thinking.
Brilliant.
And we do that in mental health when we teach students a mental health concept, but we fail to recognize that we didn't teach them all the other things that went before that we know as mental health professionals, but we haven't articulated to them.
Scaffolding is everything. And I just wonder your commentary on the importance of community support for our higher degree students, or peer support. So we rarely talk about, you've heard me say it takes a village to graduate a PhD student. That's a bit glib. But how important are community relations and those peer relationships?
They're interesting. And my personal bias, like being a bit of an introvert, is to be like, are they? But I know they are. We do know that it is the quality of those relationships rather than necessarily the quantity.
Yes.
I went through my PhD with a very small group, but because we were a very close, tight-knit group, we were able to get from each other all the support we needed. It was a small network, but it was a very functional network.
Huge.
And so there is, but the other thing is, to form those levels of connections does require time. And so going into a PhD, or in the early days of the PhD, before maybe the real heaviness of it hits, it is worth thinking about what investments am I making in all the various supportive relationships that I have in my life. What investment am I making in my intimate relationship with my friends? Am I making sure that those contact points are reasonably solid? Because if you get into a state of distress, but you don't have a social network, and then suddenly you're calling on a bunch of people to help you out who you don't actually have a relationship with, I think you can find yourself in a sticky situation, not because those people don't want to help, but there's a little bit of, sometimes they're dealing with their stuff as well. And there hasn't been this unwritten contract between us that we are intending to help each other out.
Yes.
And so I think it's, from my perspective, it's what investments have I made, and am I making in an ongoing way with the key relationships in my life during the times of the PhD that are going well. So that first year, where you're really just starting to form your ideas, you're putting your plan together. That's the time to be actually also investing the spare time that you have with catching up with friends, meeting new people in the topic, meeting other people in the department in which you're working, attending some events, and sort of shaking hands with the people. Oh, you're such and such, and you work with, okay, cool. That's, oh, and you do this. Yeah, that's fantastic. And telling people about what you're doing and starting to build that connection and that warmth of connection with other people, such that by the time that you hit your second, third, or fourth year challenges, and you turn to those people, there's kind of an agreement there that you're actually going to help each other out.
That's fantastic. And so you've invested in those networks and those relationships. I've never heard it expressed better than that, Gareth. That's amazing. Could I draw us now, as we're sort of ending this conversation? I've taken so much of your time and it's so valuable. You're a legend. My second last question is about a group that's very, very close to my heart, and that's the regional, rural, remote, the RRR students. And we have a lot of RRR crew in Flinders University in our doctoral program, and of course, RRR crew that have joined us from regional areas in Canada, regional areas in the northwest of England. So the RRR crew really matter. Can we talk about what's available for those colleagues who, as you've said, are not on the Bedford Park campus, but are our lifeblood, just the energy that we have in our lives, because they're important people in some quite challenging areas in terms of health and education, and they're doing the heavy work for the country in those areas. What can we do to help them do what they do?
Yeah, so where would I start with that one? I agree that they're hugely important, and for a number of reasons as well, not only just because of the nature of what it is they're facing and maybe the additional stresses they have on them, but a lot of people have and students have transformative experiences on rural placements that really get them to rethink
their life. Everything.
Yeah, exactly. And where they thought they would work and what they thought they would do. So it's important to make those experiences as good as possible, because more broadly speaking, I think it's an area for greater transformation. Mm-hmm. First thing is a communication from our point of view as a service. We just have to be better about letting students know that most of our programs exist in face-to-face and online versions. So you can speak to a counsellor, you can do teleconferencing, you can do Skype, you can do Zoom, Teams, whatever, and chat to one of our counsellors. And that therapeutically, there's really no difference between a face-to-face appointment and an online appointment. Don't get me wrong, they're different in how they feel and how they kind of work, but therapeutically, we don't see a difference. Clinically, we don't see that one is superior to another, because they have relative strengths and benefits that you can draw on. So that's the first thing. For us as a service, we just have to make sure that we make it clear that you have just as much access to this service as we do, as someone on the campus does. There's no difference, and that requires us to update our equipment to make sure we know how to handle the technology as well. But that's got much better over COVID. Second, we just have to. There's always networks in rural and remote that I never realized are there, but increasingly I try and tap into. So there's always either formal or informal networks of wellbeing coordinators, student reps, just staff who aren't necessarily wellbeing trained, but take on a wellbeing focus, because they're perhaps just really nice people. They're very good listeners. They end up in a role where they are supporting students. Yes. People like me have to make sure we contact those networks and ask for what students want. And the programs that we provide in the face-to-face and the campus setting aren't always what students working rural and remote want. Students tend to want programs that solve the immediate problems of the things that they're facing at the time. If they've got a bit of mental energy, they might pick a program that's a bit more higher level and a higher level skill. But usually they just want to know about solving the problems that they have. And so we've got to find those informal networks, get into them on a regular basis, and try and ascertain what students want in terms of things like group training. Because I can do evening sessions for rural and remote students, and they can connect in. as long as they've got a reasonably decent connection so they can hear what I'm talking about, they're going to be able to participate in the program. And we can do those programs out of hours or across hours, or and we can try and hone in on what it is and what problems they need solved. Because if I can learn from them what it is that are the challenges of the rural remote setting, then we can usually tailor something that's going to work. So there's a customization that needs to happen for the Triple R crew. And then in the bigger, there's some policy changes I think we're also going to have to look at down the track as well, which is there are some legal restrictions that we have about providing counselling to certain countries or overseas, because there's a duty of care issue.
Yes.
Like if a student is struggling, but we don't understand the system in which they work, because every country has its own mental health system, its own crisis and support lines, its own ways of functioning, and we don't know those systems, so we don't know how to help a student navigate them. So
yes,
there are some issues in relation to that. So that's an area, you know, that we're thinking about now. That doesn't just affect Flinders, that affects many counselling services around Australia who now have offshore students. And what is the nature of the kind of counselling support that we can provide them, so that we feel as though we're meeting our duty of care, but the student is getting what's relevant for them.
See, this is brilliant. How about you and I make a pledge live on camera here that moving from this Are You OK Day forward, from 2021 to 2022, that the OGR and your colleagues, we work together to create some learnings, but also some proper engagement with Triple R, as you've said, and it's going to change the way we offer services and offer support. But how about we make this pledge now that let's work harder on that and see what we can do.
Absolutely, count me in.
Oh, let's do it. Let's do it. You're a legend. And look, my last question is about you. You knew we'd go here. Now, you've got this outstanding research career. I've enjoyed the last 2-3 weeks where I've been reading your articles again. I've been on Google Scholar and I've gone, geez, clever. Gee, Gareth's clever.
Well, past Gareth was clever.
Oh, you're moving on up, girlfriend. You got no problems. So outstanding research career. And now you spend a lot of your time, in many ways, teaching support, but most importantly, communicating with our students. So for our higher degree students who are watching you today and looking at your role today and your expertise today, what advice would you give them about the diversity of their futures? What would you say to them, Gareth?
I would say first, be comfortable with the fact that you may end up in a role that's very different to what you can visualize now, that will be as, if not more rewarding than what you think the roles are that you'll be in. That's really what it comes down to. And yes, I'm projecting my experience onto other students' experience, but it's not just me. There's a ton of colleagues that have ended up in spaces where they're like, oh, I didn't really think I'd end up here, but I really like it. And so just be mindful that you don't have the full picture. You don't actually understand necessarily, and you can't, because you can't predict the future. You can't realize just how many different iterations or permutations of your life that there can be, of which many of them will be very happy and very rewarding and very meaningful and very purposeful. The second is from my perspective, is to not get too wrapped up in the content per se, like of your PhD. So I want you to pay attention to the content of your PhD, because you're obviously going to become a specialist in that area. But I'm in a completely different area to now when I did my PhD. Well, not completely different, but fairly different to where I was. But I don't regret at all the topic that I did, because a PhD, like I said, is a form of mental fitness training. If we want to pull that language back, it's a form of mental fitness training that prepares you for a number of different outcomes. And they're not always, and often not always, the outcomes you think they're going to prepare you for. So you do a PhD on cardiovascular disease and you end up later in your life, you know, running community programs for refugees. right? And you think, how the two of those going to come together? But everything that you did in the PhD was a form of training for the level of intellectual capacity and organizational capacity that you need down the track to be good at one of those future roles. So yeah, don't be limited by topic. Don't be limited by where you think the normal career trajectories of your area are. And yeah, be open to the possibility of there being something different. So in psych, we might talk about this as the difference between an outcome-focused goal and a values-based goal. So an outcomes goal is I want to work in this area and get this job, you know, and so it's a very precise goal. And I like precise goals and I like ambitious goals, but they need to be held lightly at times because the circumstances won't necessarily yield the outcome, that specific outcome that you want. A values-based goal is more about how do I want to be living my life on an ongoing basis. So I always want to be learning. I always want to be trying to be kind. I always want to be in some way, shape or form helping other people. And those values-based goals give you much greater scope in terms of thinking about what you could do with your future. So look at trying to meet your values-based goals, trying to be the person, the best person you can be, but realize that best person that you can be could be in so many different spaces, being that person. Does that make sense? I got a bit convoluted there.
But, oh, no, it's magnificent. Magnificent.
That would be my main one.
Well, can I just say, I mean, what you've just done, I mean, I didn't know we'd end there. I wanted to throw that question out because you've had this fascinating trajectory of a career, which is unusual. And so I wanted students to, you know, here's one we've prepared earlier. You know, Gareth's a legend, and he is where I'm sure he didn't expect he was going to be in 2007.
Yeah, exactly.
And this man is changing so many people's lives. And Gareth, you know, I can't remember my life before I met you. The insight and the wisdom and the care and the compassion, and these are words you've used a lot during our vlog today, the care and the compassion that you offer all our students, all our staff, all our colleagues in the Office of Graduate Research. You know, I can't imagine being on this journey in this tough time without you. And I just want to know that I want you to know that you are appreciated, and the work you do every single day is noticed and logged and appreciated, and it is changing not only our students' lives, it's changing how we do doctoral education. So I hope you know you are appreciated, and this vlog's been remarkable. People's lives will change through this. So thank you so much for being a part of it, mate.
Oh, thank you. Very kind words, Tara, and thank you so much for having me. I was really excited when you gave me the offer to come on here. Really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, I hope we can have another conversation down the track. Maybe
look, we certainly
related stuff.
Certainly will. We've got some projects in front of us too. So on behalf of the two of us, we wish everybody out there, particularly our RRRQ crew, we wish you love, light, and peace.
Thanks,
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
You were brilliant.
Is that okay?
You were brilliant. Oh my God.
It was really fun.